Hello, my name is Dr. Joshua Hill. Really pleased to have an opportunity to share some things with you today that I've learned through a research project that I'm currently engaged in, focused on looking at the needs of and experiences of leaders who are seeking to lead Indigenization in their schools and in a school district. Um, I hope that this time together will inspire you to think about your steps as a leader. And before we go any further, I want to begin with a land acknowledgement. I want to acknowledge that Ambrose University, as well as my home, where I raised my family, are located in Treaty 7, which is the traditional territories of the Blackfoot people, made up of the Kainai, Piikani, and Siksika, as well as the Tsuut'ina First Nation and Stoney Nakoda First Nations. Also want to acknowledge the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit whose footsteps have marked these lands for generations. I'm grateful for how the land is shared with me. I also want to acknowledge that there's leaders joining this talk today from across Alberta. I love this map put out by the Alberta Teachers Association that provides a really good way for us to visualize the peoples whose land we share and reside and work on. Also want to locate myself in this work. I mentioned that I'm currently an assistant professor at Ambrose University. I've spent the last 20 years as a teacher, school instructional leader, school system leader, and now as a researcher, a PhD. I was a PhD student and now a researcher and professor working in Southern Alberta. I bring to this work my identity as a Métis person. I'm a citizen of the Métis Nation of Alberta, and root a lot of my self-identity and culture in my family. My you can see in this slide my grandmother in the bottom corner, who was born on a road allowance in Saskatchewan on the map there by Marine Lake. And I've spent a lot of time learning on the land in that place from my grandmother and my father and uncles. There's also a picture there of my sons and I working on the land. We were doing some woodcraft on that particular day. We spent a lot of time working in the forest. Built that log cabin that's behind me there in the photo. And I like to always begin by speaking to who I am and what I bring to this work. I also gained a lot of my understanding of Indigenization through my relationship with elders in the surrounding area from where I live. Particularly, spend time with Blackfoot Elder Sakokato, and I'm also very grateful to spend time with Tsuut'ina Elder Diana Starlight. And it's some of their lessons and stories that inform my understanding of Indigenization. I want to share with you today some findings, preliminary findings from a research project. On the screen here, I've got a quick overview of that project. I want to really draw your focus on to first of all, the question. Really, this is a design-based study where we're seeking to learn in context alongside of school leaders. I've partnered with school system leaders that are made up of both a committee of an Indigenous Inclusion Council, which is made up of principals and assistant principals throughout the district, as well as some school district leader representatives. And together we're seeking to understand how we can create a welcoming, inclusive, and culturally competent learning communities to respect, include, and promote Indigenous ways of knowing, learning, and teaching. I'm going to speak in a little bit about the theoretical framework that comes to that work, but I think important for you to understand is that what I'm sharing with you today has emerged through the data that's being collected through surveys, interviews, observations of leadership practices in schools, collection of artifacts of leadership practices such as PowerPoint presentations and agendas, etc., as well as looking at education plans that have been created. In a design-based study, I'm constantly working alongside, looking at data together to figure out next steps. An example of this is we've been designing professional learning series for all principals and assistant principals that has gone throughout the year to learn more about decolonization and indigenization together. Before and after each of these learning events, I administer a survey to learn about learner needs, to learn what they want to know, what they've learned, and what they feel like their next learning steps are. I've also, as I've mentioned, conducted interviews, kind of case studies at school level, and the stories and perspectives and findings I share today really owed to the work of school leaders who are immersed in this work in Alberta context. From a theoretical framework, I want to just briefly help you understand how we're thinking about indigenization, and it's which of course connects into the LQS that I know you're working with closely. I love this sort of understanding of language that Dwayne Donald from the University of Alberta, who's a Cree scholar, helps us think about when we think about what we're seeking to do. And you might notice people use the word incorporate or use the word infuse. And I think the choice of framing is really important. And when people or teachers are speaking or leaders are speaking about what they're trying to do in terms of Indigenous perspectives, you often hear incorporate or infuse. And both of these have connotations about that I think are, well, we can read them together here. But this idea of incorporate, of bringing something into something else so that it becomes a part of something new, or infuse, right? We think about how we can infuse something in a liquid and how we can no longer determine the difference between those things. What we're aiming to do with Indigenous perspectives is not incorporate it into our teaching or infuse it into our teaching, but rather thinking about the framing of a braid. I'm thinking about, you saw in the question, we talked about including. And when I think about a braid, this particular braid image comes from Robin Kimmerer's work in a beautiful text that I really encourage you to read called Braiding Sweetgrass. And it's what we're thinking about doing is how Indigenous perspectives can be brought into our school communities in ways that contribute, that hold their unique identity, and inherently make something stronger and more beautiful for everyone. So these terms, briefly define the terms again that kind of frame what we're seeking to do. Thinking about decolonization in this role of understanding the ways in which colonization continues to play out in our biases, in our school systems, in the dominance of Eurocentric knowledge. And some of that work is really necessary alongside thinking about including Indigenous perspectives. We've learned that we can't just skip to indigenization. We need to understand the ways in which colonization has occurred and continues to occur, because otherwise we run the risk of having things play out in ways that we don't understand. There's a long history between education and Indigenous people, and the role of education in colonization was the very reason why the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada calls on education to be part of the change. And I think we need to always think about what is playing out unintentionally often in our biases and in the way our system privileges a certain way of looking at things. And that's some of the decolonization work. And in our study, we're trying to pair that alongside indigenization, where we're trying to include Indigenous people, Indigenous knowledge, Indigenous ways of coming to know in learning, in teaching, in leadership, in the ways that a school becomes and is a vibrant learning community. So with that framing, from a sort of a theoretical place, what can this look like at a school level? Again, these are things that I've learned alongside school leaders and that are happening in schools in Alberta. And I thought in this really short amount of time that we have together today, I would just share with you some of those things to get you thinking about what you're already doing in your school, and to think about what future learning you might want to do, or things you want to explore. The next slide after this is going to look at what are some of the learning needs and the support that leaders felt they needed. But I wanted to start with just sharing a little bit about what this can look like in schools. I put this one first, and I think it's foremost so far as a theme in our research project, and that is building relationships with Indigenous elders and local communities. And at the school level, this looks different in different places, but certainly seeking to have Indigenous elders involved in the school, to have local Indigenous languages spoken in the school, to have partnerships with schools potentially that are on reserve, or to have some of the schools that I've been studying have had an opportunity to have an elder involved in regular assemblies throughout the year. Some schools have had projects, collaborative projects with Indigenous communities. Teepee raising on the school grounds is another example that comes to mind. Later, I'm going to talk about professional learning, but thinking about reconciliation is all about new relationships between Indigenous people and non-Indigenous people. And we really want to pay attention to the relationships that our school has and how to foster those as leaders. Connected to that is thinking about where we can embed Indigenous people and knowledge into the school, the lifeblood of the school. We've seen daily announcements that are done by assistant principal include particular Indigenous knowledge, or special days on the calendar that that they can reference Indigenous input or perspectives. I've seen schools, again, where in Remembrance Day events and events throughout the year, Indigenous perspectives are included, and Indigenous people are a part of those ceremonies and opportunities to get together collectively. I've seen schools develop routines and practices, such as using the Circle of Courage as a whole school framework for thinking about character education and working together and giving a language and framework for all the conversations that we have about being part of community. So thinking about ways in which Indigenous perspectives leaders can think about embedding those in the very ways of working as a school. Another key theme has been the sharing of books and resources created by Indigenous people with stakeholders in the school. This can look like featuring them in the library and learning commons. This can look like doing book studies with parent council around Indigenous texts. It can be having teachers be provided with high quality resources or budget to support the purchasing of resources created and to represent Indigenous perspectives in our classrooms and schools. And materials as well can go into that. When we think about resources, there's many beautiful artifacts that I've seen in schools, as well as materials that support teachers to get outside with students. The next one that has become very important in the schools that I've had a chance to study is looking at leadership practices, so that leaders are modeling the ways in which Indigenous ways of coming to know can be a part of school. So then we're not just learning about Indigenous people, but we're using the ways that Indigenous people can help us learn to enrich the study of everything in our school, or the practices in our school. So leaders modeling things like sharing circles, where inspired by an Indigenous practice, they create a community in staff meetings, as one example. So thinking about how in your own practice, I've seen a school where they're doing work with an Indigenous concept of witnessing and think about how they can use that language of witnessing in the way they think about their role as a leader and the way they talk about their work as a leader. Creating opportunities for teachers to learn from Indigenous people. A lot of professional learning that I've seen involves bringing Indigenous people into schools to share foundational knowledge, to go on plant walks, to get teachers outside, to get teachers spending time with elders. The blanket exercises, particularly powerful opportunity for teachers to reflect on biases together and to build some understanding of the colonization process together. So thinking about how as leaders we can create those opportunities for Indigenous people to be a part of our professional learning calendar. Connected to that, having teachers spend time together focused on how they're meaningfully including Indigenous perspectives into their classrooms. Where is their authentic opportunities in their curriculum, sharing their resources and experiences, and how do we create space for teachers to do that work collaboratively? How do we support teachers to wrestle with how to do that work ethically? How to think about appropriation? There's a great amount of hesitancy and even fear for many teachers to do the wrong thing. So how do we, as leaders, create the trust and space for teachers to work together to do this work well? Clearing the path for students, teachers, and parents to learn from and on the land. Clarence Wolfleg Sr., who's a Siksika elder, often shares with me that indigenization begins on the land, and indigenize yourself first, he says, which to him is build a relationship with the land, and thinking about how we can, as leaders, create the space for students to get out of the classroom, streamlining the processes of getting the right ratio. I've seen schools with doing professional learning around helping teachers think about what they need to do to safely and feel confident in getting their students outside, creating outdoor spaces, creating backpacks that have the right safety materials and or materials to support learning, have those available, really putting a focus on supporting that work, as well as getting teachers and parents to see the value in that through, in some ways, by having them experience that and creating opportunities for those adults to see the value of being and understand the learning opportunities that come from Indigenous land-based learning. Another important piece in our research has been, again, this connection to decolonization, the anti-oppression work that's tied up in this, some of the anti-racism work that's tied up in this, and how do we help our parents and our teachers develop the moral imperative and understanding of why this work is important and why this work contributes to learning for all, and thinking about how to lead those conversations and how, as a leader, to open up safe spaces for reflection on bias, reflection on racism, to reflections on systemic racism. And this can be tricky work, but has been found in our research to date to be a very important part of ensuring that when we bring Indigenous perspectives into our schools, it's not trivialized, but rather there's an ongoing effort to do this work in a good way and be focused on the axiology and matters of ethics that are connected to and have a shared understanding of our collective desires to do this work well. Lastly, thinking about how you might create spaces in your school that encourage the inclusion of Indigenous perspectives. I've seen a bulletin board in schools. I've seen a TV. I've seen a space in a learning commons. I've seen the reorganization of bookshelves in the library to have sections that have local titling and accessible way of organizing resources to include Indigenous perspectives, outdoor learning spaces that embed Indigenous voices in their design and in their purpose are all ways that this work is being led at school. Okay, that I hope that gives you some food for thought, and I'm sure there's many of those things that resonate for you in your own practice. Lastly, I want to a huge focus of our research has been supporting leaders in this work. So what does that look like? What do leaders need? Early findings include, again, teachers or leaders themselves learning to recognize how colonization works and continues to play out, to build that understanding of decolonization and indigenization, and do some of that hard reflection together on our own implications in this work and the gaze that we all have as Indigenous and non-Indigenous people that has been created historically over time in this place. A huge one is leaders need support to build relationships with and learn from Indigenous elders and knowledge keepers themselves, to seek out those experiences. And there's many great ATA opportunities. There's some great College of Alberta School Superintendent opportunities. There's other opportunities in local communities that are connected to the bigger work of decolonization or reconciliation in our province and our country that leaders are getting involved with. And then the school district too has had a role in our particular study in supporting building relationships with local Indigenous communities and connecting leaders to elders. Leaders have recognized that they need to learn how to walk other people into this space. So not only do they need an understanding of decolonization and indigenization, but they need to support those conversations in their school. And we talked a little bit about that on the previous slide. And they also has been a huge focus on leaders wanting to know how this work can look in practice. They want to know what it looks like, feels like, sounds like in a classroom, in classrooms, and also what it looks like in other schools. So creating opportunities to learn from each other, and that kind of connects each other's experiences and learn about the practical ways in which they can move forward this work has been a really important need from leaders in this study. And as well, kind of connected to that is collaboration with one another. Leaders have, again, like teachers, are hesitant at times to get started. Some leaders at first thought maybe they weren't the right person to lead the work and have come to realize that they have that moral imperative, but then how do they do that? And it's through collaboration that they've recognized is a great way to get started, because having people to be safe with, to ask questions, to hear their experience, to wrestle with their own, with the tensions that are in this work. And that extension needs to go to school district leaders, the principal, for the assistant principal, those of us who are in positions where we're supporting others really need to think about how we can help people know that they can make mistakes and feel trust. There's going to be missteps. I've made many missteps, but I need to know that that there's going to be support for me to continue to learn and to grow. And leaders need really need that safe space as well. Perhaps this list gives you some ways to think about how you might get started or continue your journey as a leader in this area. I just want to thank you for taking the time to hear about a little bit about this study. I realize it was quite a bit in quite a short period of time. I'm looking forward to connecting with you at the optional coffee opportunity that Dr. Thomas is hosting. But I also encourage you to reach out if there's if this work is something that you're pursuing in your practice, and there's ways that you would want to pick my brain or get some support at the school level. please reach out, as I have, as I say, I carry with me a lot of stories from other leaders and would be happy to connect you into that professional network to help you continue your journey. Thank you.